All right, thank you, Ray. So conferences are supposed to end with an uplifting, inspirational presentation. Yesterday, after I did this, a lady came up to me and said, "That is the most downheartening, depressing, saddest presentation I have ever heard." And, did I miss doing something in that? I don't know. But I'll try to make it as depressing, as least depressing as possible, which means I'm going to go through some of these earlier slides real quick.
And Jim, let me comment. She said that because Jim was challenging a lot of things she's doing. So don't take a challenge as I've got to do it. He's giving you ideas and insights. So I think you'll be uplifting.
Okay. Excuse me.
Jim, you didn't tell her that you're going to have dinner with her.
She told me I was going to have dinner with her tomorrow night. I mean, that was yesterday. Yeah, so that lady who told me that's actually where we're going to visit and have dinner tonight. So maybe she was just setting me up for something. I don't know. But anyway, Tom Lassiter was the founder of the Beefmaster breed of cattle. Long time, Colorado cattleman. And I think this might be his most famous quote. "The key to profitable ranching is keeping it simple. The challenge to profitable ranching is keeping it simple." What factors affect profitability? We can talk about it. We can throw a lot of things out there. And this is what academics do. You get a lot of these ideas and then you put it into some kind of computer model. I mean, it's AI now. 30 years ago, we just talked about modeling. Now everything's AI. I got to ask AI this question, except I don't know anybody. All right, so this is the product of a model looking at, starting with 26 different parameters that they thought might have an influence on profitability, assessing that across, in this case, it was 158 cow-calf herds, bona fide producer herds in the state of Illinois. I got listed out there the top 8 influences of profitability, according to that particular data set. And I will also say I've looked at dozens and dozens and dozens of these analyses over the last 30 years. And I use this one because it's pretty well has every key point we need to know right there. So the amount of variation in profit across these 158 herds, 57% of it is simply explained by feed costs. The big overriding factor of profitability in the cow-calf business is feed costs. Usually in these kind of analysis, somewhere between 40 and 70% of the profitability is derived from feed costs. What do a lot of your neighbors really get focused on, and what do they like to brag about? Well, it's weaning weight. Weaning weight is on this list. It's the fourth one down here, accounting for less than 5% of the variation in profitability across all these herds was related to differences in weaning weight. Weaning weight's not that important. The second thing on the list is depreciation. It is a long way below feed costs. But isn't that scary that the second biggest factor in determining profitability is equipment and facility depreciation? We just own too much stuff. And then the uplifting piece of this one chart is down here at down here at number 8 on the list is herd size, scale of operation. Less than 1% of the variation in profitability was attributable to the number of cows that they had. Remember what I said about this morning? We got an outfit with 14,000 cows. We got an outfit with 29 cows. And the big difference is the 14,000 cows are losing a lot more money All right, so in my consulting business over the last 20 plus years, done financial analysis on a lot of ranches, literally from the East Coast to the West Coast, in Canada, down into Mexico. And if list out the top 4 costs based on the accounting of those clients, top of the list, winter feed. We can break winter feed into some different components. Equipment depreciation, equipment operation, fertilizer, and because a lot of businesses in the West, irrigation. So that's usually the top cost. We have land. Land investment is a big deal. I'm going to say something here. Land ownership is not essential to profitable ranching. Profitable ranching is essential to owning a ranch. In fact, there's almost no place in this country where you can buy a piece of land based on its agricultural productivity. The value of land is floored by development opportunities, recreation, scenery, and increasingly just an alternative investment to have in your portfolio. So land is more of a burden almost than anything else. Labor. How efficiently do we operate? Back to what we were talking about this morning is cows are employees of the ranch. They have a job that they need to be doing. Are you doing cows' work? Because if you're doing cows' work, it's probably because the cows aren't doing their job. Need to change that business. Okay, that's the 4 top costs right there, right? I only have 3? Well, shoot. It looks like something's missing. And it looks like it's missing right there. And that's cow depreciation. When this cattle cycle turns, the biggest cost of being in the cow-calf business will cease to be feed costs, and it will be annual cow depreciation. And we'll see why a little bit later. All right, so feed costs are the biggest cost. Now, what the challenge that so many livestock producers face is they don't know what it takes to get there. They keep doing, they make hay, they feed hay. We do it over and over and over because that's the way we've always done it. Not a consideration to, is this a sensible thing to be doing from a cost-benefit standpoint? According to LMIC, Livestock Marketing Information System, this is what the cost to carry a cow looks like these days. So this is total cash cost plus pasture rent. Now, if you own land, you're probably not writing a check to somebody to pay for the use of that land. But we always assign fair market rental value to land that we own. And so what's fair market rental value now? Is it $10 an acre, $30 an acre, $50, $90? Depends on your neighborhood. So it's hard to say exactly what's included there. All right, so this goes clear back to 1996 and up to 1994. There's a projection for 2024. There's a projection for 2025 in here, but this year hasn't fully happened yet, so we don't know what the number is. Most of my career in academia back in Missouri, we could just routinely say, it takes $300 to $400 to carry a cow. Because we could take this line clear back to 1980, and these bars, they're going to be falling somewhere in the $300 to $400 range. At the start of the 21st century, that cost to carry a cow started creeping up. Shot up, stabilized, shot up again. And this is a 2023 chart. They had actually predicted that cost to carry would drop in 2024 because there's a whole lot of people who thought 2013 was going to be the top. 2023 was going to be the top of this cattle cycle. And you can see generally after a cattle cycle peak, our cost to carry drops down a little bit because we realize, oh my God, I didn't get near as much money for my calves this year. I better spend a little less. It's a short-lived response, a couple years, and then we're back to spending money again. What actually happened, according to LMIC, in 2024 was $1,143 cost to carry a cow. Holy, it doesn't make those $1,800 calves look all that valuable anymore, does it? If it only cost you $400 to carry a cow, $1,800 calves would be quite valuable. All right, so this is the challenge that we're facing, is this steadily increasing costs. And those increasing costs are based largely on the fact that most of us still live in a 1970s business model. That is flawed. All right, so back to Tom Lassiter. The key to profitable ranching is keeping it simple. Well, profit is a very simple concept. Income minus costs. We can increase the income side of that equation some different ways. Increasing units of production, run more cows, receive a higher price per unit, market grass-finished beef rather than just selling commodity, adding enterprises, diversify, add a sheep operation because you got a lot of broadleaf weeds in your pasture, bring in a goat enterprise because you have brush, rather than selling everything as calves, carry your weaned calves over to graze as yearlings. Those are adding enterprises. All of those are avenues that we can increase the income side of the equation. And a lot of you, I said a lot of you, yesterday when we did the deep dive profitability workshop in E-Town, these are the things what a lot of people were doing, where they were diversifying enterprises, they were selling higher value products, so they were working to make a positive change on the income side of the equation. The other thing we can do to increase profitability is reduce costs. And we have two different types of costs that we deal with, operating or variable costs. This is what we're spending on a ongoing basis just to keep our operation moving. Overheads are those costs that allow us to be in the business. You can't manage costs if you don't know what they are. So I'm an advocate of very serious accounting on the cost side of the ledger. Variable or operating costs, this is real convenient. I don't think this is somebody's, spit bottle. I think I left this up here this morning. Yeah, it's water. All right, and so I think everybody's kind of aware of what these are. And for years and years within the industry, we've talked about the need to be a low-cost producer, a low-input producer. And a lot of people look at this and say, I cut every cost I could 20 years ago. What do you expect me to do now? Well, you may have cut costs in the context of our 1970s based business model, but you may not have cut the costs you may not have figured out how to get rid of costs in a new business model. One of the first steps we take in assessing the viability of an enterprise is what's called gross margin analysis. And gross margin is the difference between the value of your product and the operating cost to produce it. In any manufacturing business, our objective is usually at least 50% gross margin. We are a manufacturing business. All right, so thinking about where calf price is today and where LMIC says our operating costs are, if we can sell a calf for $1,800 and the operating cost to produce it is $1,120, you just subtract those, the gross margin is $680. All right, now some of you might say, what the hell is he talking about $1,800 calves for? $1,300 is what I got. Oh, if you got $1,300 for a calf and your operating costs are $1,143, it looks even worse. Oh, but if you sold a calf for $1,300, but you actually can own, it only costs you $500 to produce that, and you have $800 gross margin, oh, that's way above 50%. So you got to be able to figure this out for your business. What is your revenue stream? What are your costs? Well, that ratio, $680 margin, gross margin, over $1,800 revenue, that's only 38%. This ranch needs to be focused on cutting costs, not on increasing revenue. If you look at profit margin, saving $100 in cost is actually going to give you a better profit margin than having the cost stay the same and getting $100 added revenue. So until we have at least 50% gross margin focused on cost reduction, not increased production. You know, before we had these real high calf prices, I used to say, all right, if you're losing $200 in every cow that you own, is getting 20 more cows the solution to your problem? It isn't. All right, overheads. These are, a lot of economists call these fixed costs. And they include the things that are really, as I said, what you need to be able to be in the ranching business, or at least perception-wise. Land, labor, equipment and facility depreciation, utilities, insurance. Now, because depreciation is in this term, cow depreciation, some people consider it an overhead. I don't. On the overhead side of this, we also are looking for an overhead ratio. And that's how much of your total costs are tied up in the overheads. The ratio is overheads divided by gross income. So if we, listed out what all of our overheads were, divided it by the number of cows that we had, we would find what our overhead ratio is. So RMC is Ranch Management Consultants. That's the parent business for the Ranching for Profit schools. They say overhead ratio must be under 50%. And here's why. If your gross margin is 50% and your overhead ratio is 50%, what is your profit? Zero. It's a break-even business. So we focus on getting overheads to less than 33%. And you may remember from when I was talking about Burke Teichert's keys to profitability this morning, he emphasized one of those keys is an overhead ratio under 33%. So we did our worksheet and we find our overhead cost per cow, $540. So we calculate our ratio, 540 over 1,800. That ratio is 30%. So this ranch here is actually within the limits of, what we'd be looking to do. This ranch has a chance of surviving. Now, here is a overheads worksheet. And we're using an example of a property that has the capacity to carry 500 cows. And you say, well, he's talking about stuff that isn't relevant to me. You know what? These 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 cows, I could slice a zero off of that, and we could have 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 cows. And we would just slice, a zero or two off of some of these. We would still have overheads on this property that'll run 50 cows. It's just, I make stuff like charts like this up, and rather than readapting for, in Australia, they'd laugh at me for having such a tiny herd. So it depends on where you take this information. But it says it's a fixed land base. So we have a $50,000 land charge here. So that's going to stay the same. Right now, we're not managing the place very effectively, and we've only got 50 to 100 cows. And so we have lines of overheads associated with that. And I don't call them fixed costs because I don't think they're fixed. As we increase the number of cows on the ranch, we're pushing the stocking rate to get up to what our full carrying capacity might be. We see some of the overheads increasing beyond what it was when we only had 50 cows. It does take more stuff to run 500 cows than 50 cows, especially in the 1970s business model that most of your neighbors operate in. And so we end up taking overheads from 96,000 to 150,000. And this will happen. As you increase animal numbers on the place, you will probably need some more stuff. Even that's just overheads. So they go up. But the good news now is as we increase the number of cows, the overhead per cow goes steadily down. So this goes back to that principle that Burke had this morning, that carrying capacity is key. If you can increase the carrying capacity of your ranch through more effective management and carry more cows, even though your total overheads is trending upward, the overhead cost per cow is coming down. And that's why it's so important to be operating as close to your biologically optimum carrying capacity as possible, because it really helps the economics of the situation. So we will draw out a graph, and this is the ranch overhead. B&H ranch, that's the old Broken Hungry. So this is the floor of our costs. We don't need to do every slide in here. It just says that different people have different expectations of what one person can manage in terms of cattle. For the most part, if you have the right kind of operational model and the cows are doing their jobs, one person can manage a whole lot of animals. Just an example, this is Matador Ranch, Southwest Montana. They have bona fide winter there. 3,600, and this is just one piece of Matador, 3,600 cows. Southwest Montana, over the last 40 years, they fed hay a total of 90 days. And over half of those days were in the winter of 77, 78, the last time they had a bad winter. 2 men take care of this. Now, there's 20 to 25 days a year when they're processing cattle, shipping cattle and stuff, where some day help comes in. But basically, 2 people run that the other 330 days of the year. Already hit, we own too much stuff. If the cows are doing their job, which says rustle your own grub, we shouldn't be doing this. Well, no-till drill. Man, I'm one of those guys who sometimes will tell you to interseed into a pasture, interseed some legumes, no-till some warm season annuals into an area. Yeah, no-till drills are wonderful. Don't own it, though. Hire it done or lease it. What do you really need to own if you're a grass farmer? Probably not this kind of stuff. This is an example of a fully depreciated working facility. Someday you're going to have to invest and replace this. So all of that stuff is there. Now, cow depreciation. That one is a little different because we depreciate improvements and equipment over a span of life from when we purchase it till we liquidate it. Cows, we have a turnover every year in the herd. And so we have this depreciation of a cow taking place on an ongoing basis. And I plug it into operating costs for that reason. Now I'm going to give two examples of how do we figure cow depreciation. It's the difference between purchase price and salvage value, spread over the calves the cow produces in her lifetime, with interest charged. You have an investment in that cow, and like any other investment, you should expect to get a return on your money. And so we have to charge that interest for the time period that that cow is resident in our herd. Here's an example from way back in 2003. We were kind of on the lower side of a cattle cycle right then. You could buy a cow for $1,000. She was going to be worth about $500 as a, call cow, cutter cow. So the difference is $500. We're going to say we had 5 calves out of her. So that's $100. At that time, about 8% interest would have been your operating line probably. So that's an annual charge of $125 against the calf that she raised. Because this turnover of cows is happening on an ongoing basis, that cost has to be absorbed by a calf every year. We've already accounted for what you're going to get from her. But you lost $500 on your principal. How are you going to get that back? Well, her successive calves have to pay for that. Let's buy a cow this year, $3,000. We're going to get 5 calves out of her, and so we're going to sell her as a cull 5 years from now. Is she going to be worth the current $2,000 a cow, cull cow price? No. I think I put $1,200 in there because I don't know what it's going to be. I'm hoping it's not as low as $600 or something. I'm very sure it's not going to be $2,000. We'll put it in at $1,200. So there's our $1,800 loss in investment. Divided by 5 is $360. We put the 7% interest on it. And maybe I did a miscalculation, but my calculator said $511 is what that cost would be. And I actually do need to recheck that because that does just strike me as being a little bit high. Maybe it's only $400 something. But take that $1,143 cost to carry that LMIC said we had, add a $400 cow depreciation charge to that calf, and once again, suddenly that $1,800 calf doesn't look like it's worth all that much. That's the problem we have. And that just says when this downturn of the cattle cycle comes and people have to start absorbing this depreciation cost, it's going to be painful. All right, so whether you want to call it an overhead or an operating cost, I don't care. Just make sure that it is somewhere in the accounting. Variable costs, those things that change with the level of production. There is the economy of scale. It will take a lower variable cost rate if you have a lot of cows than if you have just a few cows. So rather than saying every cow in the herd has a variable cost that is $900, if you're operating at the lower level of carrying capacity on your property, it's going to be higher. If you're operating at the higher level, it's going to be lower. So in our example, using that as a variable cost, over here on the far left side, just trust me that all of these numbers flow together, the gross margin ratio never got any higher than 33%. This place has too much in variable costs. The overhead ratio, we had seen that earlier, it did finally get down to an acceptable level. And so, depending on where you are in this continuum, either you need to tackle variable costs more aggressively or overheads. Depends on your individual situation and where you have those costs. So we put variable costs on here So it's running up above the floor of overheads. Now we finally get to have some revenue. And so I'm figuring the cow-calf revenue at $1,400 per cow. So it's not the highest point of this cattle cycle. It's not the lowest point of this cattle cycle. And we look at this, and we can determine the break-even herd size. And here it's 330 cows. We have to have at least 330 cows before we're generating a profit, giving the cost structure that we have. Now comes the uplifting part. What if we reduced overheads by 25%? What would happen to this break-even herd size? Well, it very quickly drops down to 275, which means we now have 55 head. 55 of those cows are now generating us profit rather than just paying for the privilege of owning equipment. That 25% reduction in overheads was getting out of the haymaking business and getting rid of that equipment. That's how big a burden having equipment can be on what is supposed to be a livestock operation. How can we reduce overheads? All right, so I said we're going to get out of equipment. We can get out of farming. So Greg Simons, who was the number 2 guy to Burke Tykert at Deseret, this was my favorite quote from him: "The only bad thing about ranching is farming." And then we have from Ranching for Profit, the most profitable ranches in the Ranching for Profit Executive Link program are those ranches with no farming operations. I mean, everybody who's, the top thinkers in this industry recognize that owning too much equipment is a really bad thing to be in the ranching business. So alternatives to owning equipment. Let's hire a custom operator. Well, what have we done? We have just swapped our overhead cost for another variable cost. Lease equipment. We have just traded our ownership cost for a lease payment. And maybe that's a smaller number, and maybe that will help us out. But to me, the far better alternative is this one. Let the livestock do more of the harvesting themselves. Let those employees get out there and do their job. Now, our task is to ensure that we have feed standing in the field or setting in the field. If we can buy bales, for $22 a roll, I believe I'm going to buy some hay, and I'm going to, feed it out there to improve the soil. There is a time and place for doing that if the cost is appropriate for doing it. But that's how we're going to cut 25% of it out of our overheads, is we're going to get rid of most of our equipment. Oh, we can also get our carrying capacity increased to what this environment is capable of doing through more effective grazing management, so we can more realistically carry those 400 or 500 cows rather than being stuck down here, at 200 to 300. What does it cost to have pasture? Well, you can scratch out the irrigation, but this is stuff that, most of you probably do with pasture. And so every acre has a cost associated with it. Now, just because these pastures are round and they get watered artificially rather than naturally, don't think this doesn't apply to your situation. Every acre of pasture has a base cost associated with it. The more pounds of beef you can produce, the lower the cost per pound is. But we have to make sure that we're getting that increase from more effective management rather than simply buying more and more inputs and just trading dollars. We want to actually create a more productive pasture through more effective management. Here's an illustration of that concept. You remember those this morning I showed the picture of the neighboring place where they were only producing 120 to 140 AUDs per acre. That's producing 1.9 tons per acre. This particular ranch, before we came on it late in 2004, it was managed rotationally grazed for the previous 7 years, but it was like a twice-a-week rotation. And he was harvesting about 185 cow days per acre there, which is 2.7 tons. So by just putting in a fairly simple rotational grazing, he increased productivity by 50%. And then we put in additional infrastructure, increased the frequency of rotation to every 1 to 2 days, and it was generally daily. In 2009, we produced 318 cow days per acre, 4.7 tons. Our investment in infrastructure, now this was nearly 20 years ago, was less than $30 an acre. Today, the same stuff that we did in 2005 would be about $120 an acre. So the cost of doing that has increased fourfold, but the value of the livestock has increased a great deal. The cost of the alternative inputs to do conventional management have gone up faster. Increased labor efficiency. Once again, let the cows do their job. So I'm saying, all right, what if variable costs were reduced by $200 per cow? And if all those things that I listed on the cow's position description this morning, if we let them do their jobs, we would save at least $200 in operating costs. And now, with a 25% reduction in overheads, a $200 drop in that cost to carry, our break-even herd size has dropped to 160 cows. Half the herd, yeah, that's what it said, half the herd is now working for profit. Let the cows harvest more of their own feed. Stockpiling and grazing stockpile is one of those avenues for doing it. And we remember, the snowy day, the icy day, and say, well, we can't graze all winter here. And I realize that's not the problem now. It is the mud, and you have to be able to effectively manage around mud. But my view in the U.S., 85% of the land area of the lower 48 states, year-round grazing should be the norm, not the exception. There's only 3 places in the U.S. where I don't think year-round grazing is really a viable option. And I described that in the book, Kick the Hay Habit. Labor requirements, strip grazing, stockpile feed is one of the best paying jobs that there is in the cattle industry. Your job is to design a grazing cell where it becomes very easy to move those fences to graze the cattle out. Now this next one here, when we were in Missouri, 50 to 60 cows is what we typically overwintered. And I know exactly what it took to feed those cows in the winter, moving an electric fence. Typically in Idaho, we were running 400 to 500 cows on that unit where we were. And for all practical purposes, it takes the same amount of time to move the fence to feed 500 cows as it does 50, as long as you have set up your basic infrastructure with that being the objective in mind. So it doesn't take, lots and lots and lots of labor to move the fences around. So let them do the work. Excuse me, this just goes through that cow position description again. We don't need to do that, but you get the drift, right? They have jobs that they are supposed to be doing. Do not do those jobs for them. Just set up the business where they can do their work. And suddenly, ranching can become a very profitable business. The top 15 to 20% of cow-calf operations in the United States routinely make double-digit return on investment every year. Top or bottom of the cattle cycle, they might make money. And it is because how they have structured their business and what their operational model is. So summing this up, you cannot manage costs till you know what they are. So you've got to have good accounting, and please break things out as overheads and operating costs. And then you look at those and think, is that really essential? Do I have to have that? Do I have to do this? There's a famous, I don't know who actually said it, but there's a famous either Australian or New Zealand quote that if you're crazy about equipment, get a wheelbarrow. Attack the big dollar items. You know, it doesn't matter whether you use true Ivomec from Merck or generic ivermectin. Those are nickel and dime decisions that don't matter. The real question is, why are you treating your livestock for parasites? And maybe that is one that actually makes a difference on the bottom line. But the big line items are, as we said, feed costs, cow depreciation, land use efficiency, and labor effectiveness. Those are the big items. Oh, and it said, cow depreciation. How did I forget to mention that? Only own what you absolutely need, and I guess that's where I should have made the comment about the wheelbarrow. But make the cattle do more work. If you do need equipment work done, you can usually hire it done at a lower cost than you can do it yourself. Every day spent grazing is money saved. We talked about that. There it says that the cost advantage is frequently more than $1 per cow per day. 2 winters ago, when hay prices were high, for clients out west that I checked in on, their cost difference between a day of grazing and a day of hay feeding ranged from about $1.50 to $2.10 a day. If they could graze, that's what they saved on every cow every day. Let's go back to just a 30-cow outfit. That is $45, $50 a day. That's being saved. And if you can extend the grazing by 60 days, I think that's somewhere on the order of what did I save? Yeah. It's a few $1,000s. Go to the 10,000 cow outfit though, and it is really, really big money. Okay. So there's a book ad, so that means I'm done. Hopefully the last part of that was uplifting. There are ways you can make this business profitable. We just can't continue to do things the way we've always done. We have time for questions. All right. Are there any questions? I'm about to celebrate because this is my last, I'll come to those. This is my last presentation of the year. This was my last working day. I don't know if I should say that, but it's the last day that I'm doing, either consulting, speaking, anything like that. My last working day of the year. Hallelujah.
That ranch up in Montana that did very little hay feeding, how were they grazing through the winter? I assume they had snow cover. Were the cows just trained to power through?
Okay.
Were they swath grazing, or were they that kind of stuff?
They did some swath grazing. Some of it was, standing, stockpiled native meadows. A cow will graze through what they learn to get used to. It takes me back to a trip. This was in, I think, 1995. Alan Nation and I went up into the prairie provinces of Canada to do a series of year-round grazing meetings in December. We started at Brandon, Manitoba, and we'd already been winter grazing stockpiled pheasant in Missouri for a while. And in Manitoba there, I said, you know, our cows in Missouri, they'll graze through a foot of snow, no problem. Our cows here in Manitoba, they graze through 2 foot of snow, eh? Well, it's Canada. They have more snow. Canadian cows are typically even bigger than American cows, as hard as that might be to believe, but they are. I said, okay, that's cool. So we loaded up. We finished that conference. Our next stop was going to be in, I don't remember if it was Saskatoon or Regina, Saskatchewan. So we loaded up and we drove over there. And of course, December in Canada, it's dark at 3:30 in the afternoon. And so we took our drive, beautiful northern lights. It was a spectacular night. Next day in Saskatchewan, I said, you know, our cows in Missouri, they graze through a foot of snow. And over in over in Manitoba, they said their cows will go graze through 2 foot of snow. Our cows here, they graze through 3 foot of snow. Saskatchewan, that's where swath grazing started. And so, yeah, if you have a 2.5 ton, barley oats winter pea yield and you swath it down and rake it into windrows that literally are about the size of this table, yeah, get 3 foot of snow on top of that, and you know what? They're only pushing through a foot of snow to get to the swath. But there they were. Give the Saskatchewanians their due. Next stop, Rocky Mountain House, Alberta. Well, a storm front had rolled in to Saskatchewan that afternoon, and we left in blowing snow and howling weeds. Fortunately, we had a Canadian driver who managed to still get stopped for speeding as we were 3 o'clock in the morning hurtling across central Alberta in a blizzard. He got stopped for speeding. We get to Rocky Mountain House, and we go to this little rural Grange Hall, the community meeting hall. And the snow is this deep everywhere. The trees are all covered, with snow. The boughs drooping to the ground. Go in there. Missouri cows graze through a foot of snow. Manitoba cows through 2 foot of snow. Saskatchewan cows, 3 foot of snow. My cows here, they graze through 4 foot of snow, eh? And his neighbors testified that it was true. Said their faces are bloody and raw from breaking sagebrush all winter. He doesn't provide any water. They get whatever water they need from the snow. So a cow will learn to do what a cow needs to do. They will just find a way to graze, otherwise they die. Greg?
Right, so I've got about 200 acres of crabgrass, ryegrass, but I want to get it in perennial grass. And so how are we going to do that with very little equipment or none? And it's not, the infrastructure is not wonderful. It's just more perimeter fencing, 50-acre field on some of it. I know we could really tighten them up and make it happen, but I want to hear some ideas how you might go about that.
Okay. There is a time and place for buying that July cut hay, and this is a perfect example of it. You've got some good forage out there, and you're probably conscientiously managing it to utilize that good forage that's out there. And if you want to turn that into perennials with minimal equipment, and I'm guessing, knowing you as I do, that not spraying anything to do that, this is the perfect place for unrolling, not bale grazing, but unrolling hay that's loaded with, seed of grasses and weeds and whatever. But after you've grazed that off in the wintertime, excuse me, or the fall, whenever you're doing it. You do have to switch your ways from feeding hay in summer to grow winter feed to actually feeding hay in the wintertime. But that is one of the fastest ways that I have seen to use animals to spread seed, incorporate seed, is unrolling hay in those kind of areas. So that would be my first thought on it. And maybe it's the only thought I have because I'm limited to one thought at a time right now. Any others? All right. Thank you very much for being attentive.